Hello, everybody. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, November 15th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about that 12-team playoff. Just kind of want to break down a couple of things that at least I have learned throughout this early parts of the season about the 12-team and some of the issues that we're going to face as we head forward with it. Then we'll get into the players and the coaches under the most pressure as we head into this week. Definitely a couple down there in Athens, Georgia that are very much under pressure as they head into this one, and Kirby Smart in a position that he hasn't been in quite some time. Then we'll get into a little bit of a Week 12 whip around. There are a ton of different games, including a huge one in the MAC that happened earlier this week. And then we got Nebraska-USC, a very interesting game, especially for those offenses, and I'll break that down here in a second. Then we'll get to my best bets for this upcoming weekend, sitting at exactly 500 on the year, so hoping to get back on the right side of things this upcoming week. And then we'll get to a little bit of weekend wrap-up with all the injuries and headlines we haven't got to throughout the week. One of the bigger ones is around Bryce Underwood, the best player in the country in this upcoming class. A lot of money being thrown his direction, so we'll break it down on today's show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, there's a little dollar sign. You can click that, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, and we can get a little bit interactive. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's talk about that 12-team playoff. There is a lot of things happening right now around this 12-team. We are getting closer and closer to this thing becoming a reality, and I think throughout this year we figured out a couple of issues with it, or a couple of things that at least I have noticed that I think I would like to see changed over the next, couple of years, or when they expand it, possibly change it as well. And I think the biggest thing here is schedule disparities are a massive issue, one way or the other. They are going to be a huge issue for the next 2 years, maybe even 4 years, maybe even 10 years, depending on what happens with the playoff as we head forward. But let's start in the SEC. One of the best examples is in, actually, you know what, let's start in the Big Ten real quick, because that's a really good example to start with. We have Indiana. Indiana's been the example for pretty much the entire year, not necessarily playing elite opponents all over the place, not necessarily playing, the great strength of schedule that you'd love a team to play if they're going to be ranked number 5 in the country. Totally understand that. I'm not necessarily sitting here telling you Indiana's no good. They're a very, very good football team. But then on the flip side of that, you do have Ohio State that has played Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana. All three of those teams have not played anyone else from that Elite Four that we found in the Big Ten this year other than Ohio State. That's an issue. One way or the other, that's an issue. It's not to say that, Penn State and Indiana and Oregon are absolutely terrible. It's just to say they're not necessarily playing the same schedule that Ohio State's playing. They're playing 3 really tough games, 2 of them on the road. Oregon got Ohio State at home. Penn State got Ohio State at home. Indiana going on the road to Ohio State in Week 10 is going to be their very first ranked game. So it is a little bit of disparity there, and it's something that definitely does have to be fixed in the sense that you have an Ohio State team that, I don't want to say anything definitive, but is likely better than a lot of the teams at the very top of that conference. If they were to fall to Indiana by 1 point on a crazy turn of events, they would have lost 2 games by 2 points and not be in the Big Ten championship, not even be on kind of the block for the CFP. So definitely needs to be fixed one way or the other, give these teams a little bit more even of a schedule. And then in the SEC, I think you have another great example where you have Georgia. They played 4 Georgia's toughest 5 opponents have been on the road. By the end of the year, they will have played Clemson, Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas, and Tennessee. One of them, will be at home, and that's this weekend against Tennessee. So it gives you an idea of just how different these schedules are. When you take Texas into account, they only play Georgia. That's the only big-time ranked team they've played. Obviously, it's not usual that a normal year for Texas would have Michigan, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Florida, and a couple other teams on the schedule and be quote-unquote a weak schedule. But that's where we are. It's not necessarily all that strong of a schedule. It doesn't have that marquee win that you'd like, and the one time they did face that marquee team, they kind of got pushed down. I mean, they kind of got stomped just a little bit. So you're in a position where you have to figure out one way or the other how to fix this issue. Now, how do you do it? It's going to be really, really hard to do. Obviously, with 17 teams in the Big Ten, with 18 in the SEC, it's going to be a battle, one way or the other, trying to figure out all of the craziness that we have in front of us. I'm sorry, 18 in the Big Ten, 16 in the SEC. Totally got confused there. But at the end of the day, you got to find a way to get this scheduling just a little bit more even. And the way that I see it, I understand that this sounds a little bit aggressive in one direction, but the way that I would do it, if it entirely was up to me and I got to decide tomorrow how all of this was set up, 10 conference games, one conference game, and a conference versus conference battle, so we can get more of these cross data points between conferences. So let's say SEC versus ACC. We just rank you 1 through 15, 1 through 16. Some teams would be left out, but at the end of the day, you would have that conference battle and you would figure out, where does the Big Ten rank up against the Big 12, or where does the ACC rank up against the SEC? Because when you look at all of these conferences, you'll have records between the conferences, but not exactly even matchups all across the board. You had the Georgia-Clemson game, relatively even between those two conferences, but you've had a number of different games throughout this year that have not necessarily been on even footing. Miami against Florida, not necessarily even footing between the two conferences. I think having some type of conference battle would kind of fix that to a certain extent and definitely would give you more data points. And then one group of 5 team. I think that's the way that I would fill out a 12-game schedule. No FCS teams on the schedule. That would be my one big-time rule. But at the end of the day, I think you're in a very interesting position as you head forward. If Georgia were to lose this weekend and Texas wins out but loses, say, by 7 points, by 10 points to Alabama and Atlanta in the SEC title, Georgia would likely be out with 3 losses. Texas would likely be in with 2 losses, but one of them was to Georgia. How are we going to figure that? How are we going to play around with that? And will Texas possibly fall out if they don't get in? And frankly, would that be fair? Because they made their SEC championship, and then we're punishing them for playing in the SEC championship. So it's a battle back and forth, and there's no right one answer, no doubt about that. Ohio State, it seems like they're going to be okay, but if they were to lose to Indiana and be on the chopping block, then they're looking around wondering why Oregon didn't have to play Penn State, why Penn State didn't have to play Indiana, or Indiana play Oregon. So it's a battle back and forth, and you're going to have to figure out just the best way forward. And I don't know if there's a great way forward necessarily. Maybe you go back to divisions. Maybe you just expand the schedule in the conferences. Maybe you play around with pods and some different ideas that were thrown around for the SEC. Regardless, you have to find a way forward. We can't keep playing this thing where we have 8 teams that are let in pretty much subjectively one way or the other, and they're playing totally different schedules. They're playing totally different competition throughout the year. It's not to say, the 11-1 Indiana wouldn't be worthy. I've said time and again, they should be in. It's not to say that an 11-2 Texas would not be worthy. I think they should be in, but it is to say that a 9-3 Georgia has every ability to be better than a 10-2 Texas or a 10-2 I don't want to say Alabama because Alabama beat them, but a 10-2 Tennessee at the end of the year, whatever that looks like. They are going to be a better team than a couple of the teams in there, but they played a lot of these games on the road. They played a lot of really tough teams, and they'll be left out. So it's not to say, this is going to be an easy problem to fix, or it's something that can really be fixed altogether, because there's going to be some twists and turns. I don't think anyone expected Michigan to be this bad or Oklahoma to be this bad, so the Texas schedule to look this bad. But that's the reality that we're facing right now. So we have to find a way to at least even the scales as best we can. And then I think the other part of this, I have 2 more here that I think are interesting. And the biggest one is the auto-buy system just cannot continue. That can't be the way that we decide who are the top 4 teams in this bracket, because when you look around the country, all respect to BYU, all respect to Miami, and frankly, if BYU goes undefeated, there's a totally different conversation. I would argue that they would deserve one of those top 4 seeds, but there is a world where Arizona State finds their way to win the rest of the games, gets a couple of things to bounce their way, they win the Big 12, and then they're sitting as the number 4 seed. That just can't be the way that this works. I understand, wanting to reward teams, and frankly, auto bids is not my problem by any means. I think that every conference should be in. I love having the group of 5 represented. I think that's all great. I think having them be the top 4 seeds in the CFP and giving them that bye is just not fair. I don't think it makes much sense. I think it should go to the best 4 teams in the country. There is a world where some of those best 4 teams include the ACC champion or include the Big 12 champion. I think this year might be a little bit different. And I think this year might show you that maybe it's just better to put the best 4 teams there, allow Miami, allow maybe BYU or Colorado or whoever from the Big 12 to play that first round matchup against an Indiana, against someone that would have another at-large bid, and see where you're working with. If they win and move on, then all more power to them. But at the end of the day, we're allowing, I don't want to say inferior conferences because I have a ton of respect for the ACC and the Big 12, but let's be honest, it's relatively inferior to a certain extent. And if SMU is they ranked number 10 team in the country, let's say, and they're getting the number 4 seed, that just can't be the way that this goes forward. And then finally, I think a big time thing is the selection process just needs to change one way or the other. They have to find a way forward where it's not just one committee that's figuring all this out. All respect to the committee. I'm not necessarily trying to disrespect them or throw dirt on their name. But the reality is, it's not going well. As of right now, it's just not going well. It looks like they're kind of ranking teams just based off how many losses you have, and that's a huge problem for scheduling coming forward, because then you're going to have teams say, okay, well, A&M's not going to play Notre Dame going forward. Georgia's not going to play Clemson at the end of the year and vice versa, and that'll be that. So you're going to lose a lot of the great games that you have because you're incentivizing teams to just have as few losses as possible, which is more than fine. Winning should matter, but also scheduling tough teams should matter. And you're going to lose a lot of the great matchups you get early in the year because of the selection process we're putting out right now. And then you have a couple other things. I think when you look at all of the different teams on the outside looking in right now, like South Carolina, like a couple other teams out there, they're playing really good football. You could make the argument that South Carolina would beat a number of the teams in the field right now. I don't know how aggressively I would make that argument, but I do think it's worth at least looking at these teams evenly, looking at these teams in a fair view, and maybe it's about going back to the BCS model. As crazy as that sounds, I think people hated it in a lot of ways because it only picked 2 teams. It only gave you the top 2 teams, and then there was a very thin margin between the others. There will be a thin margin between the 12 and the 13 team. I'm not arguing that, but I do think it'll make things a little bit clearer, make things a little bit more even, and also not give all these fans someone to outright yell at. So I do think it'll make things a little bit easier from that respect as well, and more than anything else, it'll give respect to a couple of schedules. It'll give respect to the strength of schedule across the country, and maybe give respect to a team like Clemson for scheduling Georgia at the beginning of the year, or give respect to A&M for scheduling Notre Dame, because they should get that respect. So it's going to be a battle back and forth, and I think the selection committee does as well as they can. It's not necessarily to disrespect them in any respect. It's just to say, we need better people in that room. It can't be ADs that have connections to all of these teams. They have to leave the room when they talk about their team. They don't when they have to talk about other teams in their conference that they could benefit from with them being in the CFP. That is an issue. That has to be fixed, whether it's former players and coaches being a part of that group and only them, whether it's, going totally back to a BCS-style formula, and you just figure out who are the 12 best teams, including all the auto bids and all that craziness. But the reality is, the selection process we have right now is just not the right way to do it. It's just not the way that makes it most fair. It's not the way that fits the best teams in there, and it's a way that you're going to get a national title champion that is just not the best team in the country. So it's going to be a fight back and forth, and we'll figure out more information as this goes on. But I do think schedule disparities just have to be fixed one way or the other, including expanding possibly conference schedules. I think the auto buy system is an absolute problem. And then I think the selection process just needs to change one way or the other, whether that's keeping the selection committee and changing the people in it, or just changing the outright way we do it and going back to a formula-based thing. I don't know what it is, but a lot of that stuff has got to be changed, and I'm sure I'll have a couple more complaints here pretty soon. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the players and the coaches under the most pressure as we head into this weekend. Kirby Smart in a spot that he is not used to by any means, and we'll break it down right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the CFP. I had 3 different things that I have learned thus far throughout the season. One of them is schedule disparities are a massive issue going forward. The auto-buy system is a problem, and the selection process just needs to change very, very soon. But we'll obviously learn more, and we'll see if some of those problems kind of fix themselves throughout the rest of the season. But let's get into a little bit of a pressure watch. As we move around the country, there are not necessarily those big-time marquee games all around the place, but there's definitely plenty of people under pressure, including ones in that huge game that's going on in Athens, Georgia. And we'll start with that Tennessee head coach, Josh Heupel. He's got a ton on his plate as he heads into this one, because this could be the moment for Josh Heupel. When you talk about pretty much every coach around the country, they always have that very moment that kind of launched them into whatever the next chapter was. So for Kirby, that 2021 national championship, he beat Alabama, got that monkey off his back, and it felt like, oh, this is when everything really starts for this program. Dan Lanning earlier this year, really, when he played Ohio State, got that win, it felt like, okay, Oregon has officially arrived. They are going to be a dangerous team going forward. When Steve Sarkisian in Texas went into Bama last year and got a road win, it felt like, okay, this is a real team that is probably going to be around for years to come. This is Josh Heupel's moment. They've been able to beat Alabama at home. That's been an incredible thing and been an awesome experience for those fans. Winning on the road is the difference between a great team and a good team. It's the difference between a team that can win a national title and a team that is going to be sitting in the playoff, probably walking away with the first round loss. So that's the reality of Tennessee this upcoming weekend. And just to add to the fun, you go 10-2, you add yourself to the mess that is in the middle of the SEC, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get into the CFP with a loss here. So add that to the mix just for fun, but the reality is, you had it 2 years ago when Josh Heupel came in here with a really talented team, Hendon Hooker leading the way, and they got stuffed into a locker. I was at that game. I promise you, they got stuffed into a locker. They got dominated pretty much every which way from Tuesday, and now they're going to have to figure out what happens going forward. It's kind of like Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss last year against Georgia. Maybe you can get your get back this time, and Josh Heupel can get things rolling in. I think it's a really dangerous program if they can get this win and start rolling downhill. Obviously, the quarterback situation adds to that a little bit, but the reality is this is a moment that if Josh Heupel can take it, things get really interesting in Knoxville in a hurry. And then you got Kirby Smart on the other sideline, a guy that is staring down a situation that he hasn't been in since his very first year in Athens, a 3-loss season, which would be really crazy to watch. But at the end of the day, he also has not lost to this team since his very first year, and it was in Hail Mary fashion to Juwan Jennings. So you're in a position now where you have a lot of different things coming in that are going to be just a nightmare to deal with. You have the best running back in the conference in Dylan Sampson. You have one of the best offensive lines in the entire country. You have maybe the best defensive line in the country while you are struggling on offense and don't have many running backs to speak of. So you're in a weird position. There's no doubt about that for Kirby Smart. The defense is going to have to play their best football on Saturday, and frankly, really the rest of the way. If Georgia wants to win a national title, if they want to do the things that their fan base just outright expects at this point, it's going to be the defense leading the way in so many different ways throughout this one. So Kirby, whether he likes it or not, his team knows that if they're out on, if they lose on Saturday, they are out of this thing. It's going to be very, very hard for them to find a way back in. Maybe they have an opening here or there, but I'd be very surprised. So he doesn't want to be in a spot like he was after the SEC title last year, where you're just trying to make the argument to the committee that you deserve to be in the conversation. So it's going to be a battle back and forth. And I think when you talk about Kirby Smart, he has not gotten used to losing this many games at Georgia very much, and it could be on Saturday that entire thing changes in a hurry. And then we got the quarterback. Carson Beck, obviously under a ton of pressure. I mean, really throughout this season, probably been the player in the country under the most scrutiny throughout this season because when he came in, I mean, he was the number one quarterback in the country, the number one pick when it comes to NFL draft time, and he just hasn't quite met that. And as he gets closer to the end of the year, the pressure continues to mount. As he continues to put together not great performances, this pressure gets greater and greater. And the problem with that is he's got to go into this thing with a lot of confidence. There's no longer a get-right game. There's no longer a working your way back into form. It's not put up or shut up time. You got to be able to make the plays when your team absolutely needs them. And just for fun, that D-line's going to get after you one way or another. It's going to be a nightmare for you to deal with, and you are going to be under pressure. You have to be better in that situation. He is very capable of being that guy, of being the guy that we all saw last year and said, maybe that's the top quarterback off the board. That guy is still very much in there. It's going to be a really tall order to handle all of this business and a lot of pressure on him on Saturday. Then we got Eli Drinkwitz. He is playing a very interesting game against South Carolina that we talked about yesterday. Don't really know the consequences of it quite yet, but at the end of the day, he's still trying to campaign for the CFP with his team, and it wouldn't mean anything if they can't roll down to the other Columbia and get a big-time win this upcoming weekend. But I think the biggest thing here is it's going to be a huge, huge test going up against a team that is playing some of the best football in the entire country. They're playing angry. They're playing tough. Lenore Sellers is becoming one of the best quarterbacks in the entire SEC right now, and you have to deal with it all as your team is kind of rolling downhill. Not necessarily to say that they can't get everything back and possibly get a win here. If they do get a win here, it's massive. It gets the CFP committee's attention and at the very least puts you in a position where you can make that argument a little bit more readily if you're Missouri. So it'll be interesting to watch that game unfold, and I think when you talk about Eli Drinkwitz, he's got to put on a show the rest of the way. They have to make a lot of big-time statements the rest of the way if they want the CFP to really take them seriously. And then Deion Sanders. This is where he wanted to be. There's no two ways about that. He wanted to be in this position with this team going into a place where they can make the CFP. Thing about that is, with all of that, with all of the energy going into this last couple of weeks, with all of the scrutiny around him, all of the talk, the pressure gets a lot higher. When we talk about November in college football, it is a very, very long month for the elite teams out there, for the teams that want to find their way into the CFP. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens on Saturday because it's kind of a program definer. When you look at what Utah is, it's a lot of what Colorado has struggled with, or a lot of what the criticism of Colorado have been, which is, not necessarily being as physical as a lot of the other teams out there, not being as veteran-led, not being as experienced, not having a lot of that cohesion. Utah has a lot of that stuff. So it's going to be a battle back and forth, and I think it can kind of prove just how far he's come in the first couple of years while he's been at Boulder. So it's been a Coach of the Year level job, no doubt about that. He's been absolutely incredible, and it's been awesome to watch. Thing is, that can change in about 3 hours. If they were to fall to Utah, fall out of the CFP race, fall out of the Big 12 race, people have a lot more questions than they would have answers with Deion, and all of this Coach of the Year talk would probably go up in smoke pretty quickly. I don't necessarily think that it should, but it probably would if we're being totally honest. Then you got Dabo Swinney. I mean, when you talk about the rest of the season with Dabo Swinney, it's going to be a nightmare. He cannot take one more loss. I'll be totally honest. Another 9-3 season, these Clemson fans are going to get really mad in a hurry. And the problem is, if they lose this weekend, you have South Carolina waiting at the end of the way. And that is one of the best teams in the country, at least playing right now. So you're in a position where Dabo has to have a ton of answers this upcoming weekend, or he's going to have a ton of answers in the offseason. He's going to have to answer a lot of the questions that he's been trying to avoid, not wanting to use the portal, not wanting to be aggressive in NIL, all of that stuff. At some point, he's going to come back to bite you. If you're going to cling to that so aggressively, if you're going to make that your absolute thing going forward at Clemson, you're going to have a lot of questions to answer if you go 9-3 again. Now, if you find a way to get out of all of that, if you find a way to win the rest of the way, Miami loses another game, you get to Charlotte and get to the CFP, all of those questions are gone in a hurry. So Dabo Swinney, the best way for you to kind of handle all this, the best way for you to get rid of all this noise around your program is just to win. Put yourself in a position where at the very least you're 10-2 at the end of the year and you're in the fight for an ACC title. So I think that would at least subside fans for a time being. He would still have to answer some questions. He would still have a couple of things to figure out. But as of right now, you'd have to feel relatively good if you're a Clemson fan moving forward if you got a 10-2 season out of this. Now, if you lose this weekend and then lose at the end of the year to South Carolina, you're 8-4 and you're very angry and looking for answers. And then you got the quarterback on the other side, Eli Holstein, a remarkable player and one of those guys that is just trying to find what he had in the early parts of the season. He had missed a lot in these last couple of games, has been a little bit all over the place, has not been nearly as accurate, has not used his legs quite as much, and has gotten injured a couple of times, which has not helped us by any means. But he has a chance on Saturday to just put all that behind him. Get a big-time win over Clemson. Put yourself in position where you're putting all the pressure on Miami to go out and win the rest of their games, or you're going to take that spot from them. So you're in a really, really good position, and I think when you look at Eli Holstein, he's got to make a number of big plays in this game. They don't necessarily have the dudes to just outright over-physical Clemson, especially at the line of scrimmage. So he's going to have to make a couple of plays off schedule. He's going to have to make a couple of plays with his legs, and he's an extremely talented player and more than capable of stepping up to the plate and really doing a great job, especially at home. But this is going to be a really tall order, and especially with back-to-back losses, the pressure on this kid is huge on Saturday. And then finally, Sam Pittman. He is coaching for his job this weekend in my mind, and I kind of wish he wasn't because I love Sam Pittman, would love to see him stay in the sport, but he had a huge moment earlier this year against Tennessee. It's been really tough since then, including a loss to Ole Miss that was just an absolute beating. They got a Texas team coming in that if they can beat them, this entire fan base is back in. I can absolutely promise you. They hate Texas with all of their heart, and if Sam Pittman can get that win, a lot of things will change in a hurry. But this comes down to these guys being confident and ready to roll. I mean, you have Taylor Green back. You probably have Jaquindon Jackson back for this game. So you're in a position where everything is right in front of you. You just cannot allow this team do what Ole Miss did to you, and if it lingers just a little bit, then it can lead to another loss. It's going to be a battle one way or the other, but this moment is huge for Sam Pittman. It could be a turnaround for him at Arkansas, or it could be the beginning of the end. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. If they get another Ole Miss performance, then you might want to watch out on Monday for that pink slip. But at the end of the day, would love to see him stick around in college football. One of the best people and personalities in all of the sport, but going to be really interesting to see what happens this weekend and could be the end of his time at Arkansas. But a lot of people under a lot of pressure this upcoming weekend, no doubt about that. I think Kirby Smart might take the cake in that respect, but going to be interesting to watch all of that unfold. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we'll get into a little bit of a Week 12 whip around. We'll get into all the games we just hadn't had a chance to get to throughout the weekend, including a game in Nebraska against USC that has a lot of very interesting things about it. But we'll break it down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little bit of a pressure watch, a ton of players and coaches that are under a lot of pressure as we head into this upcoming weekend. I think Kirby Smart might take the cake because it would be his first 3-loss season at Georgia since his very first. So would be a little bit of crazy turn of events over there in Athens, Georgia. But let's get into a little bit of a Week 12 whip around because there are a number of games that happened either earlier this week or are happening this weekend that I want to get on y'all's radar. And we'll start with one that happened earlier this week. Bowling Green gets a huge win over Western Michigan, 31-13, and puts themselves in a really great spot moving forward in the MAC race. And it was Terrion Stewart and Harold Fannin. Terrion Stewart had 150 yards, 15 carries, 1 score. Harold Fannin, 10 catches, 137 yards, and 2 scores. Harold Fannin's different in every single sense of the word. If you have not watched number 0 for Bowling Green, go ahead and check him out. He is an absolute beast and might very well be the very best tight end in the entire country. But Bowling Green trailed for about first quarter and a half, sort of, and then scored 28 straight points, put this game away in a hurry, and it was that middle eight. They scored four touchdowns on 5 drives, and kind of that middle eight, middle 10 that they talk about, that Nick Saban and all the great coaches talk about, and if you can win that, then you're in a really good position to win that game. But Bowling Green joins Miami of Ohio and Ohio at the top of the conference. Western Michigan now sits in a pretty tough spot moving forward in this conference if they want to make it back to the championship. But Bowling Green and Miami of Ohio do face off in the final week of the season. Maybe that's just for a MAC title berth for who's going to go play the Bobcats of Ohio. So going to be really fun to watch that unfold. And Bowling Green still got work cut out for them, but they're in a really great position in the MAC going forward. Then we'll go to the Mountain West. Wyoming, Colorado State, a rivalry game that will keep playing as Colorado State moves on to the Pac-12. Sounds like this game will stay intact, which is absolutely huge, but this is a massive weekend in the Mountain West overall, and it really starts with this one. Colorado State is the other undefeated team in the Mountain West along with Boise State, and they need to just hold serve. They don't have UNLV on the schedule, so it's just about winning out the rest of the way, and then you'll be able to go to Boise with a chance to possibly win that conference, which would be absolutely crazy. They would not be in the playoff. They have a couple of losses early in the season, but at the end of the day, they would be a really, really good team, and the defense has really been the show for Colorado State. As much as the talk was about Braden Fowler-Nicolosi and Torrey Horton and a lot of the athletes on the offensive side of the ball, the defense has only allowed 30 twice this entire season, and it was to start the season against Texas, which makes sense, and then in a double overtime game against Oregon State. So they've been a really, really good defensive team, and I think Wyoming probably going to have pretty tough time sledding. Now, it's one of those things where they kind of got going last week. They scored 49 points against New Mexico. Harrison Whaley, very talented running back, got 150 on the ground. I do think Colorado State wins this one, but I think this one's worth watching. It's going to be really, really interesting and could define the Mountain West tonight at 8 p.m. Excuse me. And then you got UCLA-Washington also tonight. The UCLA train tries to continue to roll on up there at Seattle, and it's going to be really interesting. Washington's kind of reeling after losing 3 of the last 4, only getting that win over USC, and UCLA has won, I believe, 3 straight at this point, is looking to possibly make a little bit of a bull run. Going to be incredible to watch this unfold, and they've done a really great job. The issue is they have USC and Fresno State left. They got to get 2 of the next 3 games. They have to win. So they probably have to win either this one or USC and then get that Fresno State win. So a win here would put them in a great, great position to get to a bowl game in Deshaun Foster's first year, complete a really great turnaround, and possibly, get a little bit of momentum as they head into 2025. Now, the thing is, UCLA's magic has been absolutely incredible to watch. I think this defense is going to be a little bit too much. I don't think they're going to be able to pass the ball a little bit. I think Ethan Garber is going to make a couple of mistakes throughout this game, and I do think UCLA takes the loss here. I hate to say it, but I do think Washington gets the win and continues rolling on, and UCLA just has to claw and scratch to possibly get those last 2 wins. Then you got Syracuse-Cal over there in the ACC, a huge game that's going to go down, and Cal's coming off their very first win in the ACC last week against Wake Forest, and they're trying to get 2 in a row, and they're favored by about 10 points in this game. So it's going to be interesting to watch this one unfold. Hopefully Fran Brown can get the win and go back to showering. I think that would be good for just about everyone around him in his life. But at the end of the day, Fernando Mendoza is a very, very talented quarterback, has put together a relatively good year. Although they've struggled in ACC play, he's been able to make a number of different plays for them, and it's this entire line has moved 2.5 points in Cal's direction since it opened. So gives you an idea of where everyone kind of sits on this game as of right now. But Kyle McCord trying to get back a little bit of that early season spark that he had. He was absolutely incredible, and it's going to be a battle one way or the other. Cal's just trying to get bowl eligible. I think they do it here. I think they're on a little bit of a roll. I think that offense is going to be really hard for Syracuse to stop, and I think they've just lost a lot of juice over there at Syracuse recently. Then we got this game. This is going to be a really, really interesting one. It moved 2 points towards Nebraska yesterday, and the reason is Dylan Raiola is going to play in this one. There was a little bit of a worry that he might be up in the air, but it sounds like he's going to go, and that's only one of the stories around that's actually one of the less weird stories around these offenses over the last little bit. New offensive coordinator for Nebraska and Dana Holgorsen. He is going to take over calling plays. Has been the play caller for a lot of the great recent offenses in college football. I mean, I remember back to the West Virginia teams that he coached with Geno Smith and with all of those guys. terrifying in every sense of the word. Obviously, it's been a little bit of time since then, but has done a great job and one of the more dangerous offensive coaches that we have in the sport. And then a new quarterback for USC, Jaden Mayava, a dual threat transfer from UNLV that had a great season last year, was being courted by Georgia in the offseason. So a very talented kid that absolutely could change what this USC offense is. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens in this game. Both these teams really badly need a win. I think USC is going to get it. Give me USC with Jaden Mayava. I think it's a huge addition to that team, and if they lose this one, they probably miss a bowl game, especially with Notre Dame coming up. They're in a really bad spot. I think USC gets the win and continues moving on. Then you got Cincinnati, Iowa State, a huge one for Iowa State where they badly need it, no doubt about that. And then for Cincinnati, they're coming off a game where they essentially handed that one to West Virginia with a number of fumbles that had no business being fumbles. But at the end of the day, West Virginia got the win there, and Cincinnati officially bows out of whatever craziness that could happen in the Big 12. But for Iowa State, you're still very much in the race. If you win this one, you're in it, and you need one loss from Colorado. That's all you need at the end of the day. We'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, if they were to lose, then at least BYU and Colorado and the winner of the KSU-Arizona State game would be on top of them. That would be too much to come back from. In the Big 12 with only 2 weeks left, I think that would be way too much. So a win here is absolutely necessary for Iowa State to continue on. I think they will get it. Cincinnati is a really, really tough team, and they were able to win a number of games early on in the season. The worry that I do have is their ground defense is not all that great. They allowed Colorado to get over 100 yards rushing, and if you allow that for Colorado, probably going to allow a little bit more for Iowa State. So I'm going to bet on Iowa State to win this one. I think they probably cover that spread, but Cincinnati is a really tough team to outright blow out because of how they play. But going to be fun to watch. I think Iowa State stays in the craziness that is the Big 12. And then you got Washington State, New Mexico, going to be a huge game, and one that, yes, that over-under is real. 72.5 is the over-under for this one, and it's going to be really, really fun. Devin Dampier has 872 rush yards on the year, 13 touchdowns on the ground. John Mateer has 630 and 11 touchdowns on the ground this year. These two guys are so much fun to watch. And maybe it just comes down to who can make more plays with his arm at the end of the day, but this is the perfect game for a late Saturday night. You can turn it on a off channel, and then you'll look over every couple of minutes and you'll see another person has scored. It's going to be all over the place. I think Washington State will get the win. I think it's a little bit of a sketchy one, especially if it gets high scoring. That's exactly where Devin Dampier and this New Mexico team wants to be, so it's going to be a fun one to watch, no doubt about that. I'll take Washington State, but I think it's going to be a really interesting one. And then you got San Diego State, UNLV, another huge matchup in the Mountain West this upcoming weekend, and UNLV is just trying to get rolling downhill towards the end of the year. They will need a little bit of help from Colorado State, and maybe they've gotten it by this point. Maybe Colorado State has already lost, and now you're moving forward with a chance to win this game, get up to the top of the conference, and then see what happens the rest of the way. It's going to be incredible to watch this team, and when you talk about Hajj Malik Williams, he's been really good pretty much all year. He hasn't necessarily been the greatest passer in the world. Now, he's been more than effective, but they haven't necessarily had to lean on that very aggressively. They probably will have to in this game. San Diego State did a really good job of slowing down Boise State's rushing attack, at least for the majority of that game. UNLV is probably going to have a little bit of tough time running the ball. They're going to have to make plays through the air. So Ricky White's going to have to make some plays. Jaden DeJesus is going to have to make some plays. And more than anything, Hajj Malik Williams is going to have to make a couple of plays in this game. So when you talk about this one, UNLV could have everything to play for. They could be in the exact same situation. But if Wyoming pulls that upset tonight, if they were to beat Colorado State, UNLV would just need to win out the rest of the way, and this game would become absolutely massive. San Diego State's just trying to stay alive for a bowl game if they can. I think UNLV rolls here. I think they stay alive for the Mountain West Championship, and maybe, just maybe, depending on what happens in Wyoming, Colorado State tonight, maybe they get into the driver's seat for that conference championship. It's going to be incredible to watch that unfold, and really all across the country. You have so many under the radar games that are going to be so much fun to watch. A couple of these Group of 5 conferences that are starting to come to a head, especially the American, going to be incredible to watch with Tulane Navy this upcoming weekend, and we'll actually get into that game, including along with a number of others as we get into my best bets right after this break. A ton of games that I want to get on y'all's radar, including a couple that we just talked about that I feel pretty strongly about one way or the other. That'll break down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the under-the-radar games of the weekend. One that happened earlier this week in the MAC that is absolutely massive. Bowling Green gets a huge win and definitely puts themselves in a great position for that conference going forward. But let's get into my best bets. As we head into Week 12, there's a number of games that I feel pretty confident in. And frankly, maybe a little bit too confident. But at the end of the day, I think I have some pretty good picks here. And I think there's a number that are going to be a little bit up in the air. There's going to be a number of games that are kind of hard to get a beat on. Even this late in the season are a little bit hard to get a beat on. And we'll start with this one. I think Texas is going to cover that spread of 12 points against Arkansas. They're in a position where you have Taylor Green coming back, you have Jaquindon Jackson coming back, and that has brought this number down a little bit from about 14 to about 12. I still think Texas has it. I think this is a Texas team that we'll find out just how real what we saw last week was. You know, they tore Florida to pieces, threw the ball downfield really well. Can they continue that going into this week against one of the worst pass defenses in the country? They gave up 550 yards to Ole Miss. They really struggled to corral Jordan Watkins and Caden Lee and really their speed. Texas has a lot of speed on their team, so that's going to be a huge problem for Arkansas in this game. And as long as Quinn Ewers can be accurate, it's going to be a really long day. The Texas O-line has really started to find its level, it seems. Not necessarily playing elite football, but definitely is playing a lot better than it was before the bye week. You have Quinn Ewers, looks like he's back to fully healthy, and you have an Arkansas back end that absolutely can be torn to pieces. So I think Texas tosses the rock around, gets a very comfortable win, and they continue moving on their way to a possible SEC berth and possible CFP berth at the end of the day. But I think they get a dominating win after another dominating win over Florida. And then Tulane and Navy. I think we're going to see some points in this game. Now, I understand this game is not going to be a ton of possessions one way or the other, with these two teams being relatively heavy run teams, no doubt about that. But when you look at Navy, they've been able to score the ball really, really efficiently. And this Tulane team, not necessarily the best when you talk about defending the run, at least in a triple option style, because not many people can do that very well. But then on the Tulane side, they're just rolling right now. Darian Mensah, as long as he does not make mistakes, they have dudes all over the place, including Mekhi Hughes at running back, that are going to be an absolute problem for Navy. And I don't think they're really going to be able to keep up with. I mean, we saw Navy against someone like Jeremiah Love, excuse me. I don't necessarily think you have Mekhi Hughes on that type of level, but a very good running back that absolutely can make you pay pretty much every single chance he gets. So I think Navy is a really, really fun team. I don't think that defense is going to be able to corral Tulane. And then on the other side, I think Tulane has a really solid run defense overall. I just think that triple option look is going to be a little bit too much for them. I think these two teams are going to battle it out. I think there's going to be really, really good scoring in. I think there's going to be at least 53 points in this one. I think they get after each other a little bit, and maybe it's Tulane carrying a little bit of the weight here, but at the end of the day, I think they get over that 53. Then I'm going to take USC minus 7.5 against Nebraska. A little bit nervous about this one because Jaden Maiava is taking over at quarterback, but I really like this kid. I think he's an absolute beast. If you didn't watch him at UNLV, he's a very, very good dual threat quarterback. When you think about the great quarterbacks that Lincoln Riley has had, all of them have had that ability. All of them had that a little ability to scoot a little bit, whether it's Baker Mayfield being able to extend plays, Kyler Murray being one of the more electric runners in the entire sport, Caleb Williams being able to extend plays, Jalen Hurts being that aggressive, downhill runner. Jaden Maiava can do that. He's a very, very talented player, and with all the different players that you could kind of compare him to throughout in terms of his play style, it's a lot like Caleb Williams. It's not quite to the level of Caleb Williams when it comes to talent, but with the way that he plays, really does resemble Caleb Williams, and that kind of fits into what Lincoln Riley's going to do. For Nebraska, I think they've just gotten beaten down. I think they're in a position where that team is in a really tough spot behind the scenes. And now, I can't necessarily prove that. Maybe they'll come out there and totally prove me wrong this upcoming weekend. But I think USC is in a position where their back is up against the wall. They have to get a win. They know they have to get a win. And for Nebraska, I just think they're in a really weird spot. I don't know how healthy Dylan Raiola is going to be. I don't know how into this game this team is going to be overall. And I think Nebraska continues to fall. I think USC kind of rolls here. Jaden Mayava puts on a show, and people start to worry that maybe Lincoln Riley has his next guy at quarterback. Then I'm going to pick South Carolina minus 14 against Missouri. South Carolina is just better than Missouri. I'll be totally honest. Lenore Sellers is playing really out of his mind right about now. The D-line for South Carolina against the O-line for Missouri, one of the biggest mismatches of the entire weekend on the slate, so you're going to have a battle on your hands if you're Missouri and that offensive line, and Missouri is very likely to start Drew Pine in this game, so he had a solid game against Oklahoma. Getting that win is absolutely huge for this program, but he only completed 50% of his passes. If you're going to give Nick Imanwari in that back end a number of chances to pounce, they're going to take it, and they're going to go down and score points, and it's going to become a nightmare day for you. Missouri is a good team, but the two teams they've gone on the road and played against ranked teams against 65 has been the margin of, they've lost those games by a margin of 75-10. That was what I was looking for. Apologies for that. But I do think the Gamecocks roll in this one. I think Missouri's a good team. I don't think they're nearly the team that they are being ranked as, and I think South Carolina might be even better than what they're being ranked as, frankly. Then Oregon, Wisconsin. I like the over 52 in this one. I think this Wisconsin team's being a little under talked about. I'll just put it that way. I don't necessarily think they put together a great year, but I think Luke Fickell has a little bit something more in them, and I think this team is playing a little bit more tougher football than people realize. You also have an Oregon team on the other side that has been absolutely crisp the last couple of weeks. I even thought about taking Wisconsin against the spread, but went a little bit away from that, went for the over instead, and I think this is going to be a huge game for this Oregon offense. You look at the run game that they've been able to develop, even without Jordan James likely in this game, Noah Whittington's going to be more than ready to roll, and he's going to be an absolute problem for them to deal with. So I think they're just going to be able to score. The Wisconsin back end is a very good one. They've been able to slow down a lot of offenses, but Miller Moss was able to throw for 300 yards against them. I think Oregon has definitely the passing offense that USC has. So I think Wisconsin and Braden Locke are going to be able to at least get their fair share in this game. I do think Oregon's probably going to carry a lot of the weight here, to be totally honest, but I do think Wisconsin's in a position where they can at least get a couple of scores on the board. Although last week was very rough for Braden Locke, I think he's moving in the right direction and can make a couple of plays here. And then I like the under in the Tennessee-Georgia game. I think this is going to be a fist fight for 4 quarters. You have two offenses that have been a little bit all over the place. You have two defenses that have been two of the best in the SEC, and they're battling in what might just be a must-win. So on one side, you have the Georgia O-line that is just an outright problem. They got absolutely exposed last week when they played Ole Miss, and this D-line group for Tennessee might be as good, if not better, than that Ole Miss group. So it's going to be a really tough battle for that O-line to win. I don't see the run game for UGA getting going much at all, and we'll talk about an injury there right after this in the next segment. But then for Tennessee, whether it's Nico or it's not, this pass game has been out of sync for the last couple of weeks. It felt like they might have found something last week, but I can't necessarily bet on that. I think it's going to be a fight back and forth, and I think they're going to miss a lot of big-time opportunities. I do have Georgia winning this game, but I think it's going to be a pretty ugly one. I think it's going to stay on the ground, and I don't think either team is going to have too much success on the ground. So it's going to be a battle, and while I think Georgia's going to win, I think they're going to have to absolutely fight and claw, and that defense is going to have to make a ton of big plays for that to happen. Then Kansas State minus 8.5 against Arizona. This is going to be a huge game and one where, honestly, I could have flipped this pick and felt plenty good. I'll be totally honest. And honestly, if you flipped the place that this thing was playing, I probably would flip my pick. If you told me that this was at Arizona instead of at Kansas State, I'm almost definitely going with Arizona State. But now you're in a position where Kansas State is at home, and they're a totally different team at home than away from home. They're undefeated at home this year. They're 3-2 on the road, and Avery Johnson has really struggled on the road. He's played great football at home. He's been absolutely incredible, especially towards the back end of the season when they've been playing at home, and I think he's going to be able to find it in this one. I think that pass offense is going to be able to get going. I think DJ Giddens is one of those guys that you're just not really going to be able to stop. You might be able to slow him down a little bit, hold him to 3.5 yards per carry or something like that, but he's going to batter away at you, and it's going to find openings at some point. I also worry about how healthy Cam Scadaboo is. I know that he is back, and I have no doubts that he's going to play pretty good football. But at the end of the day, is he fully ready to roll? Are they going to have to, give it to a couple other guys a little bit more? Are they going to have him in the pass game the way that they really like to? So I like KSU to win this one by a pretty comfortable margin, keep the chaos in the Big 12, and especially more than anything else, I like Arizona State's offense to kind of just sputter in this one. I don't think it's in a very great position, especially passing the ball, and I think Kansas State just sells out against the run and really stifles this Arizona State offense. Then Boston College SMU over 53.5 is my final pick here, and it's a really interesting game going on in Dallas this upcoming weekend. I mean, you have Thomas Castellanos, the starter for Boston College, no longer the starter for Boston College, and he is no longer with Boston College. He is probably not going to travel with them to this game, is likely going to enter the portal, and probably will find a new place to play after being benched last week for Grayson James. So that will be your starter. Grayson James will be the starter for Boston College under center, and Boston College's run game has really taken off over the last couple of weeks. Robichaud has been an absolute problem to take down, and while I think SMU is going to be able to slow it down, I don't think they're going to be able to stop it altogether. I think this team is going to really want to fight, especially with a lot of the craziness that's happened behind the scenes over there at Boston College. I think they're going to want to fight in this game and at least prove themselves. I think they can do that offensively. Now, on the other side, you have Kevin Jennings, and he's been absolutely incredible this year. Even after losing R.J. Maryland, they've been really, really great offensively, and I think they can carry quite a bit of weight here, probably score 35-plus in this game, and put on a little bit of a show. So I think we get over that 53.5, get to at least 54 points in this game, and I think it's going to be a really fun game in the ACC that has a couple of, weird wrinkles in it with that quarterback position for Boston College, but it's going to be a crazy week. You have so many different games where I looked at one line, I looked at one, over, under, what have you, felt pretty good about it, and then talked myself out of it the next second. And a lot of those picks that I just had, I was fighting myself just a little bit with them, but at the end of the day, got to move forward, got to be confident. Hopefully, we can get on the right side of 500. That's where we sit right now. I believe we're 34-2 on the season. So hopefully, we can get on the right side of that, bounce back from 2 pretty tough weeks the last couple of weeks. But we'll bounce back this upcoming week, hopefully, and get back on the right track. But let's take our last break here. And when we come back, we got to get into a little bit of a wrap-up. We got some headlines. We got to talk about the future of the postseason with the Big 12 and the ACC. Bryce Underwood with a ridiculous NIL deal and a couple of different things around some injuries this upcoming weekend. We'll break them down right after this. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about my best bets for this upcoming weekend. Feel pretty good about a lot of them. I think we're going to have a little bit of a rock fight over there in Athens, Georgia, and I think Texas really rolls this weekend against Arkansas. But let's get into a little bit of a wrap-up right here because we got a couple of headlines that I want to get on y'all's radar, and we'll start with one around the Big 12 and the ACC because there are a lot of things going on around the postseason and the future of the postseason in this sport, and there's a lot of different ideas out there. We talked about the college student football league with the College Sports Today group. That's a little bit of a super league idea. The Project Rudy, which is a ridiculous thing to call a super league. That is another idea that's out there to possibly, unite all of the Power 4 conferences, make them play kind of on their own, get everything out of the purview of the NCAA, move to its own place, and set up shop and see what happens the rest of the way. It sounds like the Big 12 and the ACC presidents, ADs, a lot of the important decision makers in both those both those conferences are going to meet later in about a week or so. I think December 4th is when they've kind of tabbed as the day that they're going to meet, and it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of that. Now, the big thing to take away from this is everyone was invited. It wasn't just the Big 12 and the ACC that was invited. These two individuals, Tony Petitti, the commissioner for the Big 10, and Greg Sankey, were invited to this event. Does not sound like they're going to go, and that creates some problems. And it's the problems that we've been worried about for quite some time, but it sounds like those two conferences, the ACC and the Big 12, are on a very different page than the SEC and the Big 10. I think right now the SEC and the Big 10 are looking at the next couple of years as, let's just keep as many exit paths open as possible. Give us as many opportunities to possibly take our ball and go play elsewhere if we see fit in the next 4, 5, 6 years. And then for the ACC and the Big 12, you're saying we just got to get stability. We have to make sure that we are in the fight. We have to make sure that we are at the table going forward in the future, because the reality is there is a world where the Big 10 and the SEC break off, create their own football division, play their own championship, and that's the end of it for the ACC and the Big 12, at least in terms of being big-time conferences in college football. So that's kind of the battle back and forth, and I really hope that these people put their ego aside and get in a room and figure this thing out. But as of right now, it sounds like they are really fighting back and forth. It sounds like the SEC and the Big 10 are not remotely into the idea of these super leagues, and the ACC and the Big 12 might be a little bit more into them because they would be able to have a seat at the table. They would be protected by that agreement. The SEC and the Big 10 don't really need that protection quite as much. They have the ability to say, we'll take a relatively uncertain future because regardless of the uncertainty, we're going to be sitting on top of the pile. So it's going to be a battle back and forth. I hope they can figure this out one way or the other, because I don't want to see a reality where we have the SEC and the Big 10 playing over here and the ACC and the Big 12 playing over here. You obviously want them to all be together. Some people are going to have to put their egos aside to get there. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, that has not been necessarily a popular thing to do in college football, so we'll see what happens there, but definitely going to be a battle, and the ACC and the Big 12 seem to be ready for a little bit of a fight. Then we'll get to Bryce Underwood, because I'm sure a lot of you saw what the number was that was flying around Twitter the last couple of days. It sounds like Michigan is really trying to get Bryce Underwood, and they're more than happy to pay a little bit of money for him. So it sounds like the deal would be $10.5 million over 4 years, so obviously a little bit less if you were to leave after 3 years, which this kid's leaving after 3 years. I'm just going to be totally honest with you. Whether it's Michigan or LSU, which he is committed to right now, it's going to be 3 years. And if you're wondering why we're talking about this kid so much, why we're, leaning so much towards this crazy story that's going on around him, go ahead and watch his tape. This kid might be the next Cam Newton, and I wish I was speaking facetiously. I wish I was exaggerating. I wish I was overreacting. Everyone, and I mean everyone, that knows anything about football that's watched this kid has said he is a program changer. We just watched DJ Lagway come into Florida, give them so much hope and so much energy for the future that they're keeping Billy Napier as their head coach. That's what would happen for a lot of coaches if they hitch their wagon to this kid. He is an absolute difference maker in every sense of the word. He can do everything on the football field that you want him to do, and everyone, even people that know a lot more about football than I do, are saying that this kid is different in every sense of the word and is going to be a problem at the next level. So if you think $10.5 million over 4 years is too much, I promise you it's not. This kid is a program changer, and especially at a place like Michigan, he could make that place known for the offense and quarterback play in 3 years. He is an absolute game changer, and I think when you talk about this, you're going to have plenty to hear from LSU, and it sounds like he is leaning in that direction. It sounds like, based on a lot of different social media posts and things of that nature, that he is probably not going to decommit and flip to Michigan. A lot of that stuff changes in a hurry, so we will keep you updated, obviously, but a crazy, crazy deal. A one that gives you an idea of just how much money that some of these kids are worth, because he is worth that money, and also how much money was being held back from a lot of kids the last couple of years. So more power to him. If they're willing to give him 10.5 over 4 years, I'd take it and run with it. Now, it seems like he's going to go with LSU, but we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks, and whoever gets this kid, congratulations. You just got one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and probably you just got a guy that's going to play really, really well in the NFL and help you out there as well. So he's an incredible player, and although 10.5 sounds absolutely crazy, might end up being a bargain if Michigan can pull this off. But then we'll talk about Diego Pavia. He is suing the NCAA. He's trying to, he was denied a request for a temporary restraining order to grant him another year of eligibility. But they got to figure out what the ruling is on this lawsuit going forward. So it's going to be a battle back and forth, and he's arguing that his 2 seasons playing at a junior college level should not count towards his D1 eligibility. That is an argument that a lot of people have made before. It is an argument that a lot of people will be making coming forward, and he wasn't able to profit from his NIL. That's the argument that he's making. When you're at a junior college, you don't have that ability. It's definitely an argument to be had, should he be able to come back one more year, because now it's a professional sport. He's being, some quote-unquote money was taken away from him in this respect. It is definitely an argument back and forth. So it's going to be interesting to watch. They're arguing that he would suffer immediate and irreparable harm if he was not able to play, and more specifically, if he was not able to know if he was allowed to play before the transfer portal opens on December 9th. So I don't know if he's planning on transferring. I don't know if that's something that he's thinking about, but at the end of the day, it is going to be interesting to watch all of this unfold. December 4th is when the hearing is going to have. If he's granted an injunction, he will get another year in college football, and Diego Pavia, whether it's at Vanderbilt or somewhere else, will be a quarterback in college football for another year. I think a lot of us would love to see that. I'd love to see him in a Vander uniform next year, so hopefully him, wanting to know before the transfer portal is just making sure that this happens very quickly and not him wanting to leave. But as of right now, it's going to be a battle back and forth, and we'll see if Diego Pavia is able to get a little bit of an injunction here and continue playing in college football. I'd lean that he will, but we'll see what happens there. Definitely going to be a battle, and it's one of those things where you got a couple new arguments to deal with if you're the NCAA when it comes to eligibility moving forward. And then we got to talk about USC. USC got a 1-year probation and was fined $50,000 for an NCAA investigation that basically said the football program exceeded permissible numbers of coaches, of countable coaches by 6 during the 2 academic years of 2022 and 2023. Essentially, just saying they had too many coaches at practice, too many coaches participating in active coaching throughout the week. There's different kind of measures for how many coaches you're allowed to have out of practice, how many coaches you're allowed to have on the field, that type of thing, and they seem to have violated that. It's also certain analysts are restricted from practice and having film review 6 consecutive days for 4 weeks in the 2024 season. It's very confusing, all the conjecture, but the question about this is relatively minor news. It's relatively minor things, relatively minor punishments, because let's be honest, $50,000 is chump change for a lot of these universities around there. But at the end of the day, why is it coming out now? Has been the question that a lot of people have around, and I'm not saying that Lincoln Riley's in a bad spot. I'm not saying that Lincoln Riley's in a position where he's going to get fired. I am saying that if he loses this weekend, this could be a reason that a lot of people come after him. This could be a reason that the boosters come and say, maybe we should move on from him. As crazy as that sounds, I think a lot of this news coming out and being kind of bigger news than it probably should be might be a little bit telling of what's going on over there at USC. I'm not necessarily saying anything definitively, and I'm not necessarily betting that Lincoln Riley gets fired. I'm just saying there's a lot of stuff in the air, and this would not be a big deal, but it seems like it's becoming a big deal over there in LA, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way, but definitely something to watch, and we'll keep you updated as it unfolds. But let's get to some injury updates. As we head into this weekend, there's a ton of things you guys need to know, and the biggest thing around Tennessee, Georgia is Nico Iamaleava. He is questionable, as well as Dante Thornton. They are both questionable for this game. I have a feeling they're both going to end up going. I don't necessarily have any intel on that, but definitely feel like a lot of things are trending in the right direction around there. So I would bet Nico's going to be out there. I don't know how close to 100% he's going to be, so still very much up in the air how much of an effect he'll have, but definitely something to watch, and hopefully we'll know more by the end of tonight and maybe going into tomorrow. And then Trevor Etienne is going to be out for this one for Georgia. That's the other big news here. Huge blow to that run game, especially with Cash Jones already banged up in that running back room. Sounds like it's Nate Frazier time for Georgia. It sounds like he's going to have to be the guy that kind of carries them to a win here, at least in the run game. I bet that guy right there, Dylan Bell, is going to get a couple of carries as well. Used to be more of a running back threat, so I would bet he's going to get plenty of run from that position as well. But a couple of losses for both these teams that could put them in a really, really bad spot. Obviously, Nico, a huge deal, and Trevor Etienne is one where this run game has really struggled as of late. They cannot take any more hits, and that's a really tough one. Then you got Pitt Clemson, a little bit of an update here. Eli Holstein has not been cleared to play yet. He's going to be a game time decision. I don't know if he's going to play or not. I think he probably would. He's one of those guys that you're probably going to have to drag him off the field if you don't want him to play, and especially with how important this game is, I'd bet that he goes, but we'll see what happens. Nate Yarnell has been a solid player for them. I'd be surprised if he was able to go out and win this one, but definitely something to watch as we get a little bit closer. Eli Holstein not quite cleared yet. I'm going to bet on him to play, but don't feel necessarily all that great about it. And then for Clemson, the big news here is Peter Woods, the absolute beast of a defensive lineman. He's going to play in this game. He will be back, and that's huge for Clemson in this run defense that if they can slow down this Pitt run game, it's going to be a nightmare day for the Panthers. I can promise you that. But a couple other little things. DJ Lagway is expected to go for Florida. He's expected to be back, and I think the big thing here is it's a huge recruiting weekend for Florida. If they can get this win and Napier can send a message to this program, this thing could get rolling in a hurry. There's a lot of rumors around a lot of players that one decommitted from Florida State yesterday. A couple others are out around there that are committed to other programs. Maybe Florida has something cooking if they can get DJ Lagway on that field and get a big-time win. But let me get this from Anthony before we get out of here. I have a serious fear that the playoff committee, even if either they're going to give it... Oh, so here's the thing, Anthony, for the top 4 seeds, that just goes to the top 4 conference champions. So whether it's a, one-loss SEC or a one-loss Big Ten, the closest they could get is a 5 seed if they do not win the conference. So BYU, SMU, Miami, they wouldn't be in a position, regardless, really, if they were able to win their conference, to get that 3 and that 4 spot. Moving forward, we'll see what happens if they kind of, debate that in the offseason. I tend to think they will, but I do think they are safe, at least for this year. The question will become after that, say SMU were to lose in that championship game and go 11-2, or BYU were to go undefeated and lose in that championship game. Would they get in over a 10-2 Tennessee, or a 10-2 Ole Miss, or a 10-2 Alabama? That's going to be the battle back and forth that I think we're going to have. But in terms of them getting a top 4 seed, that won't be an issue as long as they win their conference. They will get that top 4 seed and will get that bye in the first week. So that's not so much the issue that I'm worried about. The at-large bids are going to be really interesting to watch, no doubt about that. The reason I'm saying that is how they're determining the rankings now is, yeah, I do understand where you're coming from with that, and I think the rankings are going to be a little bit confusing over the next couple of weeks as they try to figure out what the balance is between who's playing well in their specific conference, who's in the tougher conference, who's playing the tougher schedule. All of that stuff is going to be really, really tough to iron out. I do think it's going to put the ACC and the Big 12 in a really tough spot as we get closer. I've said I think they're going to be a one-bid league, and I'm feeling better and better about that as we get closer and closer to this thing. Maybe BYU can get it done if they lose in their conference championship as an undefeated team, but other than that, I don't necessarily see a path forward, and that is part of the reason we're going to have to figure out just a different way forward in the grand scheme of things when we talk about this playoff. But a little bit more injury news here as we round up this show. Brady Cook is not going to play in this game. Mookie Cooper is also out for Missouri this upcoming weekend against South Carolina. It is going to be Drew Pine, and we'll see what happens from there. They were able to win one last week, but a lot of a taller order this upcoming week against South Carolina. And then Jordan James is questionable for Oregon against Wisconsin. He didn't play last week. I wouldn't necessarily expect him to play this week, but definitely something to watch, especially if he's out for multiple weeks going forward. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every sport you could possibly want, so anything in the world of sports you could possibly need, we got you totally covered over here at GSMC. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys on Monday to break down this crazy week 12.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.